And now it's my pleasure to welcome to the store Jaron Lanier. Mr. Lanier is a computer scientist, known by many as the father of virtual reality. During the late 1980s, he founded VPL Research, the first company to sell virtual reality products, and with them developed many of the early implementations of virtual reality, including uses in surgical settings and virtual vehicle prototypes. He has continued to be extremely active in the technology community, including stints as lead scientist of the National Teleimmersion Initiative, visiting scientist at Silicon Graphics, Inc., and scholar at large for Microsoft, where he is currently a partner architect. His current interests include the intersection of computer science with medicine, physics, and neuroscience. His new book, You Are Not a Gadget, looks at the history of the World Wide Web, in particular the decisions that were made at its outset that are having far-reaching ramifications today. There's no question that the internet has vastly changed the way we all live our lives, but You Are Not a Gadget looks at the large-scale cultural and societal impact of its original design, and as well as current phenomena such as Wikipedia, Facebook, and Twitter. And now please join me in welcoming Jaron Lanier.
Hey, well, there's something about this audience that makes me feel like I'm back home at Berkeley. I can't quite put my finger on it. Some sort of strange time and space warp. This is my very first little event for this book, which was published yesterday, I think. And I'm so glad that you're sharing this moment with me. Normally when I speak, I prepare and I have a little trajectory of my ideas and what the little ending zinger will be. I have absolutely a blank mind right now. Steve Pinker would be proud of me. So I'm going to just make up a little trajectory of things to say to you. I think I want to start by talking about the process by which this book came to be, because it is an unusual one. And also, you might see me wiping my eye. I'm just getting over a thing called a Bell's palsy, where part of your face goes limp for a while because a nerve needs to regrow, and when you're healing, your eyes tear. So that's what it is. It's not that I'm sad. It's just a little bit of that. Starting about... It's so scary to try to think through these times. When I last lived in Cambridge was, I believe, 30 years ago. It's so scary. I was living in the decrepit little sleazy zone that used to be surrounding MIT down the street. And I started to work on a book. And it's interesting. I'm trying to remember. I think the following is true. Just before it was mentioned that there's going to be a talk here about the Harvard Psychedelic Club, I think it might have been Tim Leary who told me you have to write a book. Tim's an interesting character, somebody I really got to know pretty well and kind of adored, but also I came to think he made some poor decisions, which I'll get to in a second. Maybe that shouldn't be a controversial thing to say at this point. I don't know. I started to write a book, and I found it difficult to write a book. It's hard. I could write essays like crazy, but I just could never write a book. And I started working with a sequence of little angels in my life who tried to help me write a book over time. And I had a contract with Harcourt Brace, which at that time I think was Harcourt Brace Jovanovich. A nice contract, a generous contract, and they kept waiting for it for 25 years. And I never turned it in. And there's some debate about whether I had the most overdue book contract ever in American publishing. And the verdict I've heard is that it wasn't the most overdue one ever, but it was perhaps the most overdue one where money was at stake and the author hadn't died. And I just couldn't do it. It was just, I tortured so many people in my life. So let me just remember Scott Kim, who some of you might remember, who's currently a puzzle creator for magazines like Discover and some others, recorded a bunch of conversations with me and transcribed them in something like 82 or something. Tried to turn into a book, didn't work. A guy who hadn't been writing about technology named Howard Rheingold tried to help me. Total disaster. He ended up with a nice writing career about technology, so that worked out for him well, which I'm glad about. Jamie James, wonderful science writer, tried to help me write a book. He wrote a great book about the music of the spheres later on. Total disaster. I wasted a few years of his life, alas. Kevin Kelly, the founding editor of Wired, spent like a half a year transcribing conversations with me, tried to help me turn it into a book. Total disaster, wasted a year of his life. And it was horrible. It just went on and on and on. The thing that changed in the last couple of years was I have a daughter now. And I have a beautiful 3-year-old daughter named Lilibel. And she just wrote her first song called The Fish Song. I think I might post it on the internet in the next couple of days, so you can hear The Fish Song if you check in on my website. And something about that changed my feeling of what it was to be human. And I don't want to say this in a way that in any sense detracts from the life in which you don't have a kid, but for me, this particular event shifted my perception to one in which I felt very much more part of this huge flow of what this human species is over deep time. And I started to feel a less worried about what people would think of the book, whether it would be perfect or not. Certainly it wouldn't be. I felt I'm a bit of an older dad. By the time she's an adult, I'll be in my 70s or something. And I realized I wanted to leave more for her about what my thinking was. And I also was just forced to stay home a lot because those diapers just are not patient, you know? And I also discovered something startling, which is that sleep deprivation actually helped with my writing. And so chalk it up to biology, you know? Somehow there was suddenly enough focus, enough time to pull this thing together. And it still is almost unimaginable to me that I'm seeing this thing actually finished after all this time. I was almost worried that if it did become completed and was actually published, it would sort of cause some hole in space-time and destroy the universe. And it just seemed like almost an event that had been anticipated so long that it couldn't be incorporated into reality. So getting back to Tim, I hadn't thought I would talk about this, but since his name came up, I used to have a lot of conversations with him along the following lines, which is, I love the creativity and the numinousness of the psychedelic idea. I come by it naturally. My dad had actually lived with Aldous Huxley at one point and stuff. I adore the numinous aspect of it, and yet, something seemed really awry. The cultural place of drugs was so confrontational, so aligned with only one side of a huge divide, and so obviously damaging to people in some cases, and also kind of disconnected from reality, because in the times when we had these conversations, which would have been in the 80s for the most part, I suppose, more in the 90s, there was an intense degree of a kind of idealism that was retained from the 60s, and this notion that somehow taking a drug would make somebody more enlightened, somehow it would save the world, somehow it would bring peace to Earth, even though there was mounting evidence that that's actually not what was going to happen. That's not to say that various things would happen. It's not to say that the whole project was a loss. I think the numinous aspect of it was not a loss. Although personally I've never taken, Tim used to call me the control group as what happens when somebody doesn't take LSD, because I was the only person I knew for many years who had never taken it, and I remain so, I think. Oh, that brings up, for some reason, I just don't like psychoactive things. It's just like not my style. So I'm not Harcourt Brace. Now I'm with Random House. The good people at Random House left a bottle of wine in my room, but I don't drink alcohol. So this is going to be a gift to whoever asked the best question tonight. So I have no idea if it's any good. If it's bad, blame Random House and blame the internet for sucking the money out of publishing or something. So it gives you bad wine, that internet. Take that, Facebook. So anyway, Tim would say things like, don't worry. There's he had this faith that there was this kind of agenda, almost like a Christian faith, really, as the Irish mystic that he was. There's this Christian faith that reality is sort of inexorably pulling us to a better place, and all we have to do is trust in it. And he said, stay with the kids, stay with the kids. Wherever the kids are, stay with them. That'll keep you young. Flatter the kids, and so forth. And I was like, I don't want to flatter the kids. I want to just be honest with the kids, and I want to be empirical. I am aside from everything else, fundamentally, I am a committed technologist. I'm a committed engineer and scientist at different times, depending on what I'm up to. And the data really matters. And if it's possible to ask a question that you can test empirically, one should. So in starting around the same period, a new idealism was being born about the internet. And actually, there had been traces of it earlier. If you go back into the history of people like Ted Nelson, I showed up in the scene, I guess, late 70s, and it was still pretty early in all of that, obviously. And there was a relatively small number of people, some of them here in Cambridge, some of them in Palo Alto and Berkeley, and a few other places, who were starting to formulate a feeling of idealism that was at the very least as potent as the idealism that the psychedelics crowd had, perhaps even more so. A lot of the same things. Somehow we're going to bring peace to the world. We're going to make all these things better. And I remember at that time, I learned how to do the guru talk. I learned Tim's game. I really did. I had the skill. I could go into a room and get people just so excited and so happy with these visions of this incredibly meaningful thing. And the reason I could is because I believed it. Actually, my real, I don't know if any of you ever had a chance to see what my talks were like back then, but the person I was really emulating even more was Alan Watts, if anyone remembers him, who had a magnificent understated style and could just bring about this amazing portrayal of the numinous aspect of things. So I was doing that with technology, but I made a promise to myself after one of my arguments with Tim that I would always follow the data, and that if 10 years went by, 20 years went by, 30 years went by, if I looked at what was happening in the world and the ideology wasn't being borne out, I would actually say so. I wouldn't do what Tim did and pretend. It's not that I would turn against it completely if only a portion of it was wrong, but if something wasn't working out, I would say so. I would not address people who were younger with flattery. I wouldn't try to make them love me. I wouldn't try to retain the guru's sort of persona into my middle age. Instead, I would try to look honestly at what the results were and report them and try to help people understand the thread that had started the whole process so that if it wasn't working, we could wind back and figure out where it might have gone wrong. That's what this is. This is my attempt to not be Tim in this particular way. I hope a little bit of the numinosity is still apparent in my writing. I still feel it, actually. I mean, the thing is that a great deal of the optimism and the idealism that we felt back then feels every bit as true and present to me today. It's more an implementation problem. It's sort of, I think the core is still there. So since the book, in order to do its job, has to make a lot of negative statements, maybe I'll make a few positive statements to balance it. One of them is that people, for the most part, are not passive couch potatoes with nothing to offer. People, for the most part, instead, are unique, creative, and have a lot to offer, and are needed. That's a difficult idea, because if that's true, it suggests that the job of information systems is to help people find a way to express and bring out this value that they have, but also survive off it, to live off it. And we succeeded in the first half and not the second half. And we got to do the whole program or it's not working. But that faith, that underlying faith, is very important. A lot of the stuff I criticize in the book, and I don't really feel like dumping on it right now because it's already in there. You can read the rant. It's there. It's not pretty. It's tough. I'm tough and honest as I see things, and so the criticism is definitely present. But the thing is that the people who tend to disagree with me, I think, in a sense, at core, even though they describe me as being, well, he's sour, he's whatever, he's what was one of the negative reviews I think said I was I don't know, like some old guy who wanted to stay relevant and was this or that. And the thing is, though, that in the things I criticize, I detect a pessimism about human nature, because there's this notion, what if we set up the kind of system that you suggest, where people could actually live off their brains when technology gets good, which is part of what I'm proposing needs to happen. That'll be disaster, because very few people actually could have anything in their brains that they could live off of. And the majority of people are like these passive people who want to enjoy the benefits of free stuff, and then we'll just make up institutions to support the minority of people who'll feed them that stuff. And I mean, I'm sure the truth is somewhere in between. There's some sort of ratio of creativity to passivity overall in the human species that's never been revealed, because we've never really tested it fully. But all the evidence so far from the internet is that it's way closer to creativity. And I used to say things like, every person is a genius in some way. It might not be in a conventional way. But in order for somebody just to survive, in order for somebody to build a life, they have to develop themselves to some degree, that there's got to be beneficial side effects to that for others. In most cases, anyway. I used to say that the world that was anticipated in the 19th century by Karl Marx and H.G. Wells and Mark Twain and many others, the world in which the machines get good enough that people don't have to toil all the time, when that world happens, the most valuable resource in a world of, I don't know if that word will happen, but technology is getting better, and let's just bear with me on that one. If you're skeptical, it can happen, that's fine, but just bear with me on this as a hypothetical. Were there to be a world of plenty because of better technology, that the most valuable asset would be creativity, because it would be the thing that would forever be in short supply. And the wrong turn we made was in pretending creativity didn't exist. And the reason it happened is because of this very strange spiritual turn of events. And this could go on into hours and hours. I think I'm only supposed to talk for 20 minutes, so I'll tell just a little bit of the story that's in the book, and then I'll conclude. The wrong turn actually started before I was born. It started at in the aftermath of World War II. A fellow named Alan, who knows who Alan Turing was? Everybody? It's so nice to be in a smart town. So Alan Turing might very well be the guy who saved us, because he broke the Nazi secret code, Enigma. Had he not done so, it's not clear what would have happened to England, and if England had fell, it's not clear what would have happened to the U.S. Problem was that he was gay, and it was illegal to be gay. And he was tortured by the UK government, basically. He was subjected to an enforced, bizarre medical regime that was supposed to make him straight, and it consisted of forcing him to accept high doses of female hormones. And in the sort of Freudian steam engine metaphor world that preceded our current digital mistaken metaphors, in that strange world, it was supposed to balance him out. Instead, he developed breasts and other female characteristics which he didn't seek, and he became terribly depressed and committed suicide by turning himself into an anti-Eve sort of. He laced an apple with cyanide and killed himself in his lab. Now, the reason this story is relevant to us is that just before his death, he wrote something down which was one of the most rare sorts of things that can be written down, a genuinely new spiritual idea. I don't think they come along very often. And the spiritual idea was human-machine equivalence. He proposed the thought experiment called the Turing test, in which a machine pretends to be a person and a judge is asked to distinguish them just from, I guess, what we would call tweets today. And if the judge can't tell them apart from the tweets, then he asks, doesn't the machine at that point deserve equal rights? And I think this is a very tender and tragic story, because here's this man who helped defeat the Nazis, who were identity-based murderers, and he himself was murdered based on his identity. And he asks the question, what is the limit that we should find for granting empathy? But that idea somehow aligns with a certain aspect of a lot of technical minds. We could say a slightly Asperger-y quality, perhaps, in current nomenclature, in which you identify with what Turing, anyway, believed would be this pristine, Platonic, perfect world of the machine that frees you from mortality, from sexuality, from imperfection, messiness, ambiguity. And in this pristine world, you find another form of life, a form of life that isn't subject to these tortures. And I think that amazing leap that Turing made, essentially a new kind of religion, if you will, a new form of solace, has been in competition with the sort of numinous stuff I was talking about, another what I would call a humanistic approach to competition, for all of these years since. And with the highest respect for Turing, I think inadvertently and understandably he started this other idea. And so if you think that way, you might start to think that the internet is coming alive, it's turning into a big living thing. That one of the co-founders of Google says that all the time in public. If the internet's coming alive, then we are all just the thoughts in it. We become neurons. We become less important. And you make designs that de-emphasize personhood. You make designs that de-emphasize personal responsibility or personal reward or personal narrative, personal identity. Crucially, you create designs that don't allow personal forgetting. Facebook would have destroyed Jack Kerouac or Bob Dylan or Mark Twain. Can you imagine Bob Dylan showing up in the Village with a Facebook page from Minnesota? Forget it. He's dead. You know, it wouldn't happen. So there's it's this information being more important than self-invention, and putting information above people is essentially the mistake I'm criticizing. And the whole book is simply about that. It's ultimately a story about which forms of spirituality are the most survivable. That's fundamentally what the contest is. And finding survivable, authentic spirituality is really the only path to survival for us. So that's what I'll say for now. And I'm so grateful that you're here. So now I think we're going to take questions. All right, so I think it's absolutely crucial to draw distinctions here between what I'm criticizing and what I'm not. To me, the web is a tremendous success, and Web 2.0 is a pile of crap. So, you know, to me, those are two totally different questions. So the web itself is amazing. I mean, consider what the web gave us as a gift. How often do we get fundamental new good news about human nature? So when the web was just being born, there were all these debates going on. I mean, people screaming matches like, nobody will want to contribute unless they're being told to. You need leaders, you need advertising, you need coercion, you need all this stuff. And what happened is the whole thing just happened by volunteer. And I'm not opposed to volunteer stuff. In fact, the first wave of web stuff wasn't anonymous. You know, it's potential to be a person and be a volunteer. I'm not, but all this Web 2.0 stuff tried to figure out some way to exploit that amazing piece of good news. so the web itself was a huge success, absolutely without question, and remains so, and remain. You know, a world without the web would be sad. You know, and similarly, a world without the internet, which is sort of the layer below that. We're sort of piling on these layers of ever greater meta-ness, which is another thing I talk about in religion. The quest for meta-ness is the new meaning of life. You know, so I would peel back that layer, and I am so sorry I don't remember the other part of your question.
Well, the question was, so Nelson had this idea.
Oh, could it have been built? Well, you know, Ted's the worst software manager in the history of software. He actually, and I adore Ted. I just adore Ted, and one of my missions with this book is to raise awareness about him. But oh my God, it was I mean, even the most countercultural, hippie-ish, tolerant people in the world were driven crazy by how crazy Ted was. But so I remember. Oh God, I can't even say some of the things I can't even say, but it was just like the stupidest stuff from the 60s, like all bundled into like a software team. And there was always like, we're going to change the world. And then, well, yeah, but one of the guys is living with his mom, and the other one, the other one's drunk. And then this one, I bet there's a Xanadu person here, not all the people, but there was like this. The point is that Ted just had like this crazy thing going on, and then Ted would like, oh, I have this vision of this other layer we're gonna put on it. We're gonna do that, and he'd like have this like incredible abstract. We're gonna build the entire user interface out of nothing but these little L-shaped things on the screen, and they're gonna interlock together, and they'll make your word processor, and they'll make your spreadsheet, and they'll do everything. Like, oh, and there can't be anything but this L-shaped piece. That's the way it's gonna be. So. The thing is, he was absolutely, you know, the wrong person for that part of the job. And it's terribly sad. But it also has to be said that he had to endure an extraordinarily difficult environment, because it's hard to, the stuff's contentious today, but it was contentious even back then. And I mean, I remember, God, one of these events at some hippie place in Palo Alto or something in the late 70s, Ted's giving his standard Xanadu talk, and this band of Maoists flash mobs him before there was digital technology, jumps up on stage, you're going to keep money, and the internet didn't exist as a word then, but you're going to bring money into the world of computers. They got to be free. You're a capitalist. Evil pig, and we've been watching you. We're watching you, and he was like, well, fuck you. And it's like this is not going to get anything built. It's just not going to happen. So that's what it was like, and I think there's this principle of first thought, best thought that often, or beginner's luck. The first person who approaches something often just nails it because they just see it with fresh eyes and they take in the whole thing. And Ted had that extraordinary vantage on all this stuff that became the web. And HTML, the HT is hypertext, which was Ted's term for it. So he really foresaw, he invented this whole thing. And if he had actually been able to realize even a portion of his Xanadu design, I'll make one I'll state this. I'm certain if Ted had succeeded at engineering anything, there wouldn't have been a recession because there would have been so much wealth growth. I feel quite certain of that. No, it's a combination of that and the Maoists and the fact that all of us were flaky, and every single one of us, including me, was convinced we had infinite powers as technical kids, and we were all idiots. All right? So it's all of those things. It's like a confluence of idiocies. So that's why I didn't get. But the core, his clarity of vision was absolutely spot on, though. There's a tremendous fascination with complexity, and in fact, there's this sort of strange thing that happened where the design of the internet evolved at a time when there was a particularly heightened fascination with complexity. It was coincident with the time when some of the ideas about being on the edge of chaos were becoming popular. And the outcome was really rather strange. The design of the internet was made more obscure than it needed to be. Because there's this idea, well, even though we're laying this out and people are doing this, we're going to pretend that we couldn't possibly remember what we did or understand what we did because we really want to enjoy seeing it do its own thing. And a bit of that is one thing, but we really did it to excess. So we have this sort of insane situation now where we have to investigate the internet as if it's like some alien planet that we know nothing about, even though we just built the damn thing really pretty recently, you know? And it's sort of a ridiculous kind of practical data loss that was a deliberate creation of hassle for ourselves in order to create a certain fantasy on a massive global scale at great expense. And it's extraordinary, but that's what we did. The original core, decentralized is different from unknowable, though. So the idea of packets was to be able to route around in case a nuclear bomb took out part of the network. Ironically, we've kind of evolved the thing in such a way that it doesn't quite have that robustness anymore in various ways, and yet we increased the degree of unknowability beyond where it needed to be to have robustness. So, I mean, yes, of course that was the origin, but it wasn't what guided it. Is Richard Stallman here? Okay. I'm just checking. I don't know. It's Cambridge, you know, he could show up. We used to go to Emacs and Bolios and stuff. So I remember like 30 years ago, I was like in Richard's decrepit falling down apartment, and we were fighting over this girl we both wanted to date, and it was like this stupid ass kid thing. And what? I think we would know if she was here. And Richard was crying, and he was saying, "Oh, my beloved work is going to be destroyed because this little startup is going to own it, and they're going to go out of business, and the world will never benefit from it." And it's such an interesting question because, so my response at the time, this was another one of these first thought, best thought things. What I said to him is, you know, there's a lot of levels of idealism, and what if, in order to keep up all the energy to have this idealism that you don't want to let a business own software, you want to keep it all part of a commons, what if to keep that going, you don't have enough energy to also make the software itself and its content remarkable? Because the immediate thing he was going to do was make a version of Unix, which became, you know, the GNU thing, and then eventually Linux. And it's like, Unix? I mean, even back then, I thought it was like it's pretty boring. It's sort of like saying, I'm sure a bookstore like this doesn't have any boring books. Wait, here. It's like saying, we are going to collectively write a version of this that we will give away. And it's like, okay, that's great. But you know, and so that's how I felt about it. Like, you know, if you're going to choose which idealism, and actually, so this brings up another. I remember Richard did something extraordinary at a time when China was just barely open at all. He went to China and he said, "Here, take this free software so you don't have to buy it from the evil American companies." And I just think of that not because there's all this controversy with companies having to compromise or not with China, and you know, I mean, you don't necessarily get to be so competent and so powerful in your life that you can live out all ideologies to perfection and all your ideals. You have to make some choices. You have to prioritize. And I just honestly don't care if my web server was written by an unpaid collective or some paid team somewhere. Or, you know, as long as the code is good, you know, it could be trained penguins in Antarctica. As far as I'm, you know, the code is actually pretty important too. So that's, you know, but, you know, Richard's another character from that era who is, like Ted, you know, very brilliant and very original and also just extraordinarily difficult. I think on a macroeconomic level, the way the open Creative Commons, whatever, Hy-Vee kind of world, the Hy-Vee League, I could call them that, the Hy-Vee League interprets the sort of abundance of bits, the fact that you can have so much stuff. You can only have so many gardens because of the limited amount of land, but you could have lots, blah, blah, blah. So you can make a copy without destroying the original. So they interpret it as, well, that just makes it all the more reason to make it more of a common sort of a thing. But see, the way I see it is the first bits in history were money. right? And the thing about a money supply is that if it's too loose, it doesn't work. If it's too tight, it doesn't work. It has to be just about right. And what that means is there has to be a homeopathic amount of artificial scarcity in it in order to support a growing economy. And this gets into this whole economic theory and stuff. So I think that's exactly what's also needed online, that on a macro level, the problem with taking a file and isn't that the original file is missing. The problem is that it removes the possibility for that homeopathic bit of artificial scarcity that allows an economy to happen so that you can have investment and get a return and so forth. I mean, you need that time. That's a necessary component for a growing market. Now, you can say, I hate capitalism, I hate markets, let's do it differently, and that's in a conversation too. But if you're going to go down this path, I think you really do need that component. First of all, Google as people I really like. I've known the kids who started it since they were really kids. The guy who's running it now, somebody I've known for decades, and I was chief scientist of a company they bought, and I've benefited from Google. I'm totally conflicted in talking about Google because I like them and I personally benefit from them, so I have every incentive in the world to say positive things about them.
I don't hate you, I'm just...
All right, but a couple things about Google. One is, in my opinion, there's a natural monopoly around the ad exchange that's of the category of natural monopoly that arises in something like a PayPal or an eBay, that when you have a digital exchange, the boundaries of that exchange are so literal and so sharp-edged and so hidden inside a server that it's harder than in other types of markets for a competing exchange to arise. So you have amplified network effect. There is some controversy about this. There's some people who are arguing that we all make too much of this particular phenomenon, but come on. I mean, it's crazy. Look at it. I mean, Microsoft, which I'm also conflicted with, I'm like massively conflicted in all directions, so I'm an honest broker. I'm suspended between. So Microsoft puts all this money into Bing to compete with it. They're just like inching little bits of market share, and it's because of this effect, right? So problem number two is that a pervasive monopolistic advertising exchange service does become coercive. At some point, you just have to start treating it as a business expense to make sure you're in charge of your own communication with people. And that's a problem. And I don't want to get into this too much because I'm sure it'll turn into some huge court thing eventually, and I shouldn't really get in the middle of it, but it's a problem. Third thing is, I mean, the idea of funding information systems through advertising actually, so far as I know, originated with a guy named Chris Whittle, who proposed to solve the problem of how to fund advertising in America by putting advertising in classrooms in the 80s or 90s or something. And I was once asked to debate him at one of these conferences, and I said, funding education or culture through advertising is like trying to get nutrition by connecting a tube from your butt to your mouth. And now, I realize I'm presenting a rather formal theoretical economics argument here, but the thing is, I think precisely the same argument applies in the long term to Google. That once everybody's aggregated for all this advertising, there's nothing left to advertise. It eats itself like an Ouroboros, a snake. Instead of the tube, you could substitute a snake. So this is not sustainable, and it is a problem. And I think it ultimately, I mean, Google. I like Google. The idea of PageRank was great, and having a search engine is great. But the advertising model, the advertising business, is where I have a problem. And what I'd much rather Google did is had us pay for the search. I'd rather pay a penny per search than have the whole of society turn into an advertising agency. No, I started with computers before that, but I did have a gig with Atari, and in fact, at one point I was a researcher when I was very young at a place called Atari Cambridge, working with a guy named Alan Kay above Kendall Square, that other square. And I think what you're thinking about, the moon-related thing was I did a video game called Moondust in '82 or something that was in its day successful, and it was the first improvising music product and the first sort of art video game. I think that's what people thought anyway, and it was pretty successful. I think it's pretty much forgotten. Going back to Ted Nelson, the single biggest mistake is that there's more than one logical copy of any file.
Any other big ones?
Yeah. Are you kidding? Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, but an amazing amount flows out of that. I mean, Ted's idea is there should only be one logical copy of a file. Of course, there might be cached for performance, but there's only one. Then you can have a microsystem where you pay to access it. So the whole idea of cut, copy, paste goes away. And I'll make another green argument. The internet actually is a big energy hog these days, and almost all the bits flowing over it are total crap that are unneeded. And it's unconscionable. Well, where it's going to go is a really interesting question, and it's such an interesting. I don't know where it's going to go. I'm trying to influence it. If I knew, why would I bother to? Yeah. Okay. So I believe there's a generation gap in social networking users that's actually the inverse of the cliche, where people who are old enough to have jobs and kids, say, I don't know what the age cutoff is, maybe early 20s or something, tend to have pretty good experiences, say, on Facebook. They might say, oh, I can reconnect with my old friends, maybe I can meet some new people. All the sort of usual narrative that applies for what a great thing it is applies to that age group. People who are younger are the ones who I've personally found, and I can't give you data on this because I just don't think it's been studied properly, but the ones I've communicated with who are younger, let's say 17, tend to, first of all, use it religiously, but also have a tremendous amount of anxiety about it. And the anxieties they express are, am I in the right crowd? Do I have enough friends? Am I high enough status as perceived? Am I cool enough? Now, all of these things are precisely the things that all of us have worried about and all kids have worried about since the species came into existence. However, the difference with Facebook is that when you put in the digital representation, you simplify the thing itself. You turn everybody into an entry on a tax form or something, and there's a feedback loop where people are sort of stuck within their representation on various levels. And I could go into different details about this, but you can't be both in and out of a relationship at the same time, which you can be in real life because it's hard to understand, but you're just like on Facebook, you're sort of, you know, there's a bit that you set. Another issue is what I talked about before, the inability to forget, the inability to erase. So you can end up being sort of trapped. If you happen to go down a path that you then don't like, it's very hard because there's a commercial incentive in controlling that information. Facebook has influenced society so much, and it's influenced by a quest for profit that's totally failed. You know, the thing is it doesn't make money, or it doesn't make money to speak of, so it's basically this religious experiment. It's like this ideology said, oh, maybe this will work, and it changed everything, but to no effect. You know, it's just so strange. So, I mean, what else to say about Facebook? It empowers geeks, because if you have any geeky digital skills, then you can actually control your privacy settings, and if you don't, you can't. They're just complicated enough that they're at the threshold where it disempowers the non-geek and turns them into a more passive consumer, sort of abused person. But I like the Facebook kids, you know, I know them too. And the thing about, I want to make another comment, which is, this is sort of, the technical communities that make stuff are made of weirdos. You know, like if you go to a good physics or math department, you don't see GQ models and stuff. You know, you see like this whole weird variety of all kinds of different people. But the Web 2.0 is so based on popularity that all the entrepreneurs are like these alpha guys who are like, it's like so weird. Like they're all super conformist, and this might be a mean thing to say, but it's really true. And there's a very strange sense of entitlement because the business model, because of the monopolistic aspect of the Google ad exchange, there's no hope for any of these people to make money. So their only hope is to be popular enough to be bought by Google or Microsoft or somebody. So it's not really a market even. It's sort of a fake market, in my opinion. I care a great deal about tools, and I have a tremendous passion for trying to build better tools, and I feel like I've been able to make some contributions in that area, but I want to do more, and more is desperately needed. Because tools are everything, you know, obviously. Now, we've evolved enough here that we can look empirically at some results of different approaches. So I do really think, and this is something that upsets the Linux crowd and stuff, but the Linux movement and also the Wikipedia and a lot of other things tend to emulate designs that already exist. They might evolve them a bit incrementally, but basically there was already Encyclopedia, there was already Unix, and then these things are evolutions of those things. The really different stuff comes out of shops that are closed, and the reason being closed temporarily matters is for the same reason that it's important to be able to be confidential before publishing an academic paper. It's because you need to have encapsulation to get your ducks in a row and do testing without the whole world being, like if everything in the world is connected to everything else, you get what I call a global mush, and you can't achieve excellence. You need to have, another term is punctuated equilibrium. You need to have punctuated encapsulation. Life on Earth evolved cells for exactly the same reason. Evolution without cells, cell walls separating genes would create just more goo on the Earth. It wouldn't create us. So iPhone apps are made by general developers are better than Android apps. I mean, seriously. I mean, you know, this shouldn't be something that's controversial. Why? Because you can make money. The bad thing is Apple can reject you. You know, trade-off in life. Just like my argument with Stallman way back. It's a genuine trade-off. I'm not saying it's perfect. There's also, so you know, the paid model spawns off new companies. Like on the Windows system, and I've criticized it a great deal in the past, although I think it's become much better lately, spawned whole industries of developers building things, some of which were quite good. Mathematica, I don't know, I mean, I could give you all these examples. The open movement doesn't do that. Punctuated equilibrium, capitalistic, team-based, paid-for content gave us Will Wright. The open source world cannot give us Will Wright. It's just too much work, too much risk, too much speculation. And also, to do original work, you need to be able to get an investment and then separate yourself from the world a while to do it. You can't be engaged in this constant, like, oh, I just added line 13 to this piece of code for this part of the Apache's, you know, thing or something. It's like ridiculous. You can't work that way. You know, there've been a whole bunch of them that have been developed over time. So there's one I was involved with, which is an interesting semi-success, semi-failure, which was called Second Life. And I know there's a Second Life group in town, so there might be some people here from it. Hey, okay, cool. And obviously I'm a virtual reality guy, so I like the virtual world approach. But the interesting thing about that is when you go to somebody's space, it does give you a sense of them. You know, if there's some personal eccentricity or something, you can get there's just a bit of a feeling of that person. It's their damn land, you know. And commerce also works within it. It has a lot of qualities that I think are good. I think the tricky part with it is, honestly, I think it's I'm sorry to say this, but the tools just need to get a lot better because there's a point where the content started looking the same, you know, and the tools just really need to get better. The avatars need to get better and all that. But another issue is that this geography thing can be a pain in the butt because an infinitely large planet just gets hard to navigate and hard to deal with, and you end up just using some abstraction anyway, and then you wonder, well, if you're just teleporting, why did you even bother with geometry? And that whole thing is a really interesting nexus of problems. But what I like about it is it does give people a space that really can be quirky. So, you know, in my mind, there's just sort of the spectrum of how much design erases people. So my space lets people be a little bit more, to show their freak flag, a little bit more than Facebook. Because in Facebook, you can put up weird pictures, but it's within this framework. MySpace, you can really just make an ugly, crazy thing, which is good. Second Life is even better. You really, and it forces you to put some work into it. There's a trade-off, but obviously a lot of people do it, so we know what people have it in them. We shouldn't worry that people don't have it in them. Yeah. Totally legitimate question. You might get the wine, actually. And the thing is that I think one of the most important messages of my book is that, especially if you're an engineer, especially if you're a technologist, it's really crucial never to pretend that you know an answer that you don't actually know. And I won't pretend to know the answer to your question, but I will tell you why I'm searching for it. Thank you!